A SpaceX rocket piece, which has been floating in space since last year, has smashed into the moon. Earlier this year, astronomers determined that the rocket stage, which had dumped its remaining fuel and could not be controlled, was on an orbital trajectory ending at the moon. For more on this story, we can bring in James Andre. James, what exactly happened here, and why don't we have pictures of it?
Now, we don't have pictures, and it has yet to be, I'd say, completely confirmed. But when you take the calculations, it is pretty clear that normally this 14-meter long tube, which is a piece of rocket, has technically crashed onto the moon, or at least that is what is expected. But we have no live pictures simply because none of the spacecraft that orbit the moon at the moment were close to the crash site in order to film this live. The first vehicle that will be flying over the crash site is a Korean spacecraft called Danuri, and that will happen 8 hours after the crash. But once you've done that, probably we won't have pictures of the crash site straight away, simply because the scientists have to compare before and after, and that is how they will know that indeed there is a new crater on the moon, because that's what they will be looking for. The other thing we're waiting for is potentially pictures from the super powerful telescopes on the American continent, simply because they're the ones who are, it was still nighttime when this crash occurred in some parts of the American continent, north and south. So they will have probably taken some pictures of what should be a flash of light, simply because this piece of rocket landed on the moon surface at pretty much twice the speed of a bullet fired out of a rifle. That's 8,400 kilometers per hour. You should see a flash of light and a plume of smoke that experts believe could be as high as 100 kilometers. But once again, it is 385,000 kilometers away. So, of course, it's a big piece of rocket, but it's so far that it will take time to process those images, even if you have very, very high resolution, before you can actually publish them, because you need to check that what you are looking at is actually the crash, and then make sure that that you can publish them, safely. There were some pictures of a crash site you just saw there. Those are the crash site of an experiment made by NASA. This was back during the Apollo 13 mission, and they crashed on purpose a piece of Saturn V to study the structure of the moon, because they'd put a seismograph during Apollo 12. Well, it took them 40 years to find the crash site. Hopefully, it'll be quicker now, thanks to higher resolution equipment.
So this piece of rocket was just floating around space as junk. How many objects are there in space that are just floating around?
Now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of objects. Now, we've just added a piece of junk on the moon. There are tallies on how much there are. So there are, according to scientists, 3,000 man-made objects on the moon surface. The NASA itself considers that it has deposited 796 objects, and the total mass of that junk, if you will, which is on the moon, is 190 tons at this stage. Now, what happened with this Falcon 9 rocket, that a piece of which has crashed today on the moon, it was launched on January 15 of last year, 2025. It was carrying 2 lunar landers, and of those 2 lunar landers, the mission wasn't 100% success. One of them actually landed on the moon as planned. The other one, which was made by a Japanese firm, crashed on the lunar surface. And then, the tube that was holding them basically was just sent on an orbit in space and has crashed onto the moon. The big question mark is, and very quickly, is that, this sends debris all over the place. So if there is to be an inhabited base, for example, on the moon, these crashes on the moon pose great problems, because there are particles flying all over the place at hundreds of miles per hour.
We'll see when we get that confirmation. Thank you very much for that, James. James Andre there.